Hollow Creek Forest was the last place anyone wanted to visit, let alone spend the night. Nestled on the outskirts of town, it was notorious for its dark history of disappearances and eerie legends. Despite its sinister reputation, a group of high school seniors found themselves camping there for their biology field trip. Their teacher, Mr. Caldwell, assured them it was safe, dismissing the warnings as exaggerated folklore. But as the students gathered around the campfire on their first night, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "You guys know the story, right?" said Ethan, the class clown, as he poked at the fire with a stick. "About the Hollow Man?" "Don't start," groaned Mia, rolling her eyes. She hated ghost stories, but her curiosity got the better of her. "What's the Hollow Man?" Ethan leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They say he's the spirit of a man who got lost in this forest decades ago. He wandered for days, starving and desperate, until they say he did something terrible to survive. Now he's cursed to roam the woods, looking for his next victim." "That's just a dumb campfire story," said Sarah, trying to sound confident. But her trembling hands betrayed her. Before Ethan could respond, a sudden rustling in the bushes made everyone freeze. Mr. Caldwell shone his flashlight in the direction of the noise, revealing a raccoon that scurried away. "See? Just a harmless animal," he said, trying to reassure the group. "Now get some rest. We have a long hike tomorrow." The hike the next day led them deeper into the forest. The dense canopy above blocked out most of the sunlight, casting long, jagged shadows across the trail. The air grew colder, and an unnatural silence enveloped the group. Even the usual sounds of birds and insects were absent. As they reached a clearing, Mia noticed something strange. Carved into the bark of a massive oak tree were symbols she didn't recognize, intricate patterns that seemed to pulsate faintly. "Mr. Caldwell, what's this?" she asked, pointing to the carvings. Mr. Caldwell frowned as he examined the symbols. "Probably graffiti from some pranksters," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Let's keep moving." But the symbols stuck with Mia, a nagging unease settling in her chest. She noticed Ethan snapping photos of the carvings with his phone, a mischievous grin on his face. "For the group chat," he said when she gave him a questioning look. That night, the students were restless. The campfire crackled, but its warmth did little to dispel the chilling air. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She wasn't alone. Sarah sat close to her, fidgeting nervously. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, clutching Mia's arm. Mia strained her ears. At first, there was nothing, but then she heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on wood. It seemed to come from all directions, growing louder and more insistent. "Probably just trees creaking," said Ethan, though even he looked uneasy. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then came the scream. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, echoing through the forest. The group scrambled to their feet, their faces pale. "Everyone stay together," Mr. Caldwell shouted, his voice shaking. But as he counted heads, he realized Ethan was missing. The search party set out immediately, flashlights slicing through the darkness. They called Ethan's name, but the forest swallowed their voices. The strange symbols appeared on more trees, their faint glow now undeniable. "Over here!" shouted Jake, another student, as he pointed his flashlight at something on the ground. It was Ethan's phone, lying in the dirt with the screen cracked. Mia picked it up and unlocked it, finding the last photo he had taken. It was a blurry image of the campfire, but in the background, just beyond the light, was a shadowy figure watching them. A cold dread settled over the group. "We need to go back," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Caldwell hesitated, but nodded. "We'll alert the rangers in the morning." But as they retraced their steps, the forest seemed to change. Paths they had taken before were gone, replaced by unfamiliar trails. The symbols on the trees grew more frequent, their glow brighter. The tapping sound returned, this time accompanied by faint whispers. "This isn't possible," Mr. Caldwell muttered, consulting his map and compass. Both were useless. Panic set in as the whispers grew louder, forming words that sent chills down their spines. "Join us. Stay forever." They stumbled into another clearing, and what they saw made their blood run cold. In the center was a crude wooden structure, like a makeshift altar, surrounded by bones. Some animal, some unmistakably human. Tied to the altar was Ethan, his eyes wide with terror. "Help me!" he screamed, struggling against the ropes. But as they rushed to free him, the shadows around the clearing began to move. The Hollow Man emerged, his gaunt frame towering over them. His hollow eyes burned with an unnatural light, and his long, clawed fingers reached out toward the group. Mr. Caldwell grabbed a branch from the ground and lit it with the campfire's flame, wielding it like a torch. "Get back!" he shouted, driving the creature away from Ethan. But the Hollow Man didn't retreat. He circled them, his movements slow and deliberate, Like a predator toying with its prey, the group's screams filled the night as the Hollow Man lunged. Mia and Sarah managed to untie Ethan, and the three of them ran, leaving the others behind. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees twisting and shifting to block their path. The whispers grew deafening, and the tapping turned into thunderous pounding. Somehow, they burst out of the forest just as dawn broke. Gasping for breath, they turned back to see the forest's edge shrouded in shadow, the Hollow Man's silhouette watching them from the darkness. The Rangers found no trace of Mr. Caldwell or the other students. The clearing with the altar was gone, as if it had never existed. Mia, Ethan, and Sarah never spoke of what happened, but they never ventured near Hollow Creek Forest again. And at night, when the wind howled, they swore they could still hear the tapping.
It had been closed for decades, shrouded in rumors of malpractice, patient disappearances, and ghostly sightings. Blackwood Asylum sat like a hulking shadow at the edge of town, its barred windows and crumbling facade daring anyone to step inside. Most people avoided it entirely, but for a group of high school students on an overnight history field trip, the asylum's dark allure was too tempting to resist. Their teacher, Ms. Parson, had arranged for the class to visit a nearby historical site. However, when the bus broke down a few miles away, the group had no choice but to seek shelter from the encroaching storm. The only refuge nearby was the asylum, its rusted gates creaking open as though welcoming them. "We'll wait here until the storm passes," Ms. Parson said, her voice laced with unease. "Stay together and don't wander off." But the moment they stepped into the grand foyer, with its peeling wallpaper and shattered chandeliers, the atmosphere shifted. The air was thick and oppressive, and every footstep echoed unnaturally loud. "This place is so creepy," whispered Emma, clutching her friend Liam's arm. "Why does it feel like we're being watched?" Liam shrugged, though his own unease was evident. "It's probably just our imagination. Let's stick with the group." While Miss Parson tried to contact a tow truck, a group of students, Emma, Liam, Katie, and Jordan, decided to explore. They ventured down a corridor lined with rusted wheelchairs and faded patient charts scattered across the floor. At the end of the hallway stood a heavy metal door with the words Ward C painted in faded red letters. "Isn't this the ward where—" Katie trailed off, her voice trembling. "Where all those patients went missing." Jordan smirked, always eager to play the tough guy. "Come on, it's just an old building. What's the worst that could happen?" He pushed the door open, and it groaned loudly, revealing a long, dark corridor. The air inside Ward C was colder, and the faint scent of decay lingered. Flashlights danced across the walls, illuminating scribbled messages written in shaky handwriting. "They're watching. Don't trust the doctors. Leave while you can." "This is messed up," Liam muttered, his voice barely audible. The group moved cautiously, their nerves on edge. At the far end of the ward, they found a small room filled with rusty hospital beds. One bed's restraints were undone, hanging limply over the sides. A chart lay open on a nearby desk, detailing the treatment of a patient named Eleanor W., who had been subjected to experimental procedures. "Who does this?" Emma whispered, horrified. "This isn't history, it's torture." Katie's flashlight flickered and died. "Guys," she said, her voice rising, "my light's not working." Before anyone could respond, a loud crash echoed through the ward, followed by a faint, melodic humming. The group froze, their eyes darting around the room. "What the hell was that?" Jordan hissed. The humming grew louder, filling the room with an eerie, otherworldly melody. Shadows began to move on the walls, twisting and contorting as though they had a life of their own. A cold gust of wind slammed the door shut behind them. Panic set in as the group tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The humming transformed into faint whispers. voices overlapping in an incomprehensible chorus. Emma turned her flashlight toward the corner of the room and screamed. A figure stood there, its back to them. It was a woman in a tattered hospital gown, her long, matted hair obscuring her face. She didn't move, but the air around her seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. "Who are you?" Liam managed to choke out, though his voice trembled. The figure slowly turned, revealing a hollow face with empty eye sockets. Her mouth twisted into a grotesque grin, and she began to crawl toward them on all fours, her movements jerky and unnatural. "Run!" Jordan shouted, and they bolted from the room. The corridor was different now, longer and more twisted, with doors on either side slamming open and shut. Shadows darted out of the corners of their eyes, and the whispers grew louder, forming words that chilled them to the bone. "You shouldn't have come. Stay with us. Forever." Meanwhile, Ms. Parson, still in the foyer, noticed that several students were missing. She ventured into the asylum, calling their names, but her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. She stumbled upon an old staff directory and found a photo of the asylum's staff. Her blood ran cold when she recognized one of the faces, a nurse with a cruel smile and dead eyes. It was the same face she'd seen in a fleeting shadow earlier. The sound of footsteps behind her made her whirl around, but no one was there. The lights flickered, and a figure appeared at the end of the hall. The nurse, holding a rusted scalpel. Ms. Parson backed away, but the figure moved closer, her movements unnaturally smooth, almost gliding. Back in Ward C, the students found themselves hopelessly lost. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, looping back on themselves. Liam's flashlight caught another set of scrawled words on the wall. "Don't follow the light." "What does that mean?" Katie asked, her voice quivering. As if in answer, a faint light appeared at the end of the corridor. It flickered like a candle, beckoning them forward. "No," Emma said firmly. "We're not going that way." But Jordan, ever the skeptic, started walking toward it. "It might be the way out," he argued. The moment he stepped into the light, a deafening scream tore through the air. The group watched in horror as Jordan was lifted off the ground by an unseen force. His body twisted violently before being flung into the darkness, his scream abruptly silenced. Emma, Liam, and Katie ran blindly, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They burst into what appeared to be the asylum's operating theater. The room was filled with rusty surgical tools and bloodstains that hadn't faded with time. In the center of the room was a single chair, its leather straps worn, but still intact. "We need to get out of here," Liam said, his voice cracking. The shadows in the room began to coalesce, forming the figure of the woman from before. She raised a skeletal hand, and the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. "You don't belong here," the figure hissed, her voice echoing unnaturally. "But now you can never leave." The next morning, the tow truck arrived, but there was no sign of the students or Ms. Parson. The driver searched the asylum and found only abandoned rooms and eerie silence. On the wall of the foyer, new words had been added to the graffiti. "They're with us now."